There's some things in life that just aren't the same when something or someone is missing. I don't know how many of you guys have watched The Office, but this scene broke my heart when I watched it, and I honestly didn't want to keep watching the show because The Office is not the same once Michael leaves. If you've never watched it, spoiler alert, Michael leaves. He leaves Dunder Mifflin, and the show's just not the same after that. It's not as funny. It's not the same. Maybe you remember what it was like when your favorite character left a TV show, or maybe you remember when you went to the family reunion and your favorite cousin wasn't there and you were just kind of awkwardly in the corner while your family talked, or maybe you had your favorite food but your favorite sauce or your favorite side was missing. Some things just aren't the same when something or someone is missing. For us as Christians, we live in a world that isn't just missing God in a lot of areas, but the world is actually pushing God aside, trying to dismiss God and get rid of him in so many different areas. Our world continues to move further and further away from God, and as Christians, we have to figure out how to navigate this. We can't just sit back and allow the world to keep pushing God to the side and keep removing him from what we're doing, but we have to find a way to do something. For you guys as high school students, you're involved in so many different things. You're around so many different groups of people. You're in sports and clubs and extracurricular activities. You have jobs. You have multiple friend groups. You're doing so much. But the truth is that so many of the things that we're involved in, God seems to be missing from it. And maybe missing isn't the best word because God is in everything, but we're ignoring God in those things. The things that we're involved in, the things that we do, the places that we go, God is being ignored in those areas. And so what do we do? What can we do about this? The big question that I want to wrestle with tonight and the big question that we have to answer is, what do we do when God is missing from an area of our life? What do we do when God is missing from an area of our life? Tonight we're continuing in our Summer King series, and the king that we're talking about tonight is named Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a really good king. He did a lot of really good things. And something that I love up front about Hezekiah was that he was a guy that took action. He was a guy that didn't sit around and wait for things to be done, but he got his hands dirty and he took action when needed. And I want to jump right into his story for tonight. It's found in 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verses 3 through 11. Should be on the screen, or you can follow along in the Bible app. It says, "In the very first month of the first year of his reign, Hezekiah reopened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. He summoned the priests and Levites to meet him at the courtyard east of the temple. He said to them, 'Listen to me, you Levites. Purify yourselves and purify the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove all the defiled things from the sanctuary. Our ancestors were unfaithful and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They abandoned the Lord and his dwelling place. They turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors to the temple's entry room, and they snuffed out the lamps. They stopped burning incense and presenting burnt offerings at the sanctuary of the God of Israel. That is why the Lord's anger has fallen upon Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of dread, horror, and ridicule, as you can see with your own eyes. Because of this, our fathers have been killed in battle, and our sons and daughters and wives have been captured. But now I will make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn from us. My sons, do not neglect your duties any longer. The Lord has chosen you to stand in his presence, to minister to him, and to lead the people in worship and present offerings to him.'" And so in our story, Hezekiah, he takes over as king, and literally the first thing that the text says once he takes over is that the first month of the first year of his reign, he reopened the doors to the temple. And what I absolutely love about this story is that Hezekiah wastes no time. Right when he takes over as king, he recognizes a huge problem for this city, and he does something about it. The problem was that God was being ignored in Jerusalem. The problem was that God was not being honored in a place that he should have been. He was being pushed aside. He was being dismissed. He was being replaced by other gods. And when Hezekiah took over, he recognized this, and he wasn't okay with it. Jerusalem at this point in time was a place that was spiritually dead. God was not being honored. He was not being worshiped. And to back up a little bit, Hezekiah takes over as king for a guy named Ahaz. And Ahaz was a really bad king. He did a lot of really stupid things. Quick list of some things that he did. He followed bad examples. He worshiped other gods. He encouraged his people to sin and to be unfaithful to God. He broke things in the temple. But the worst thing that he did was that he shut the doors to the temple so that no one could go in and worship God. And he actually set up altars all around the city of Jerusalem for the people to worship these fake gods. So not only did he not allow people to go into the place to worship God, but he actually encouraged them and set up places for them to worship other gods around the city. And a temple in this time, it was the place where the Israelites believed that heaven and earth united. So this was the place that was sacred to them where they could go and they could worship God. And now Ahaz had basically shut this place down and didn't allow them to go there. Ahaz had made every effort to remove God from the city and replace God with these other fake gods. And like we said, Hezekiah, he recognized how big of a problem this was, and so he immediately took action. And the first thing that he did was gather a group of people to reopen the temple and get it back and running. He took the responsibility of making God known in this city on himself, and he wasn't okay that God kept getting pushed to the side and getting removed. And so what he did was he got a group of Levites together, and Levites were just people that were chosen to serve in the temple. And so he got the Levites together, and he basically said, hey, it's time to turn this thing around. He said it's time to fix what's been broken. It's time to reverse what Ahaz did. It's time to get the temple back to what the temple is supposed to be. And what's really cool is that they fixed everything in just over 2 weeks, which is incredible and a really quick process for everything that they had to do. But in other words, what Hezekiah did in this city is that he led a revival. Hezekiah led a revival in the city of Jerusalem. And I don't know how many of you know or are familiar with the word revival. I know within the past year you probably have heard it on some level, but this word revival, it just means life again. Okay, revival, it means life again. It means bringing life to a place that is dead. It means bringing God back into a place that was spiritually dry or spiritually dead. It means to bring life to a place that's dead. For Jerusalem, this was a place that was spiritually dead. God, he wasn't being worshiped. He wasn't being honored in this place. And as Hezekiah brought God back into this place, he brought life back into a spiritually dead place. He brought revival in the city of Jerusalem. And what I love about Hezekiah's story is that what he did is something that we all can do. The kind of revival that Hezekiah led in Jerusalem is the same kind of revival that we can lead in our own spheres of influence. It's the same kind of revival that we need to, and I believe that we are called to lead. And so the question is, what does this look like? How can we do this? How can we lead this kind of revival in our own life? And the first thing that we have to do is we have to recognize the problem. We have to recognize the problem before we can take action. And the sad but true part about Hezekiah's story is that the same problem that Hezekiah had, the same problem that God is being ignored, he's being dismissed, he's not found in this city, that same problem is the same problem that we have today. The truth is, where we go, the sports we play, the activities that we're involved in, the friend groups that we have, the places that we work, all of these areas, most of them, God is being ignored in. God can't be found in those things. He's not being honored in those things. He's not being made known in these things. He's absent, he's missing, he's being ignored in those areas. All of us are a part of something on some level that's not actively making God known or honoring God. And it's not necessarily our fault, but that's just the culture of the world that we live in. And so my question is, what are you involved in that's not actively making God known? What area of your life does it seem like God's being ignored? What are you involved in where it seems like God is being ignored? Like I said, maybe it's your sports team. Maybe it's a club or an extracurricular activity that you're in. Maybe it's the place that you work. Maybe it's your own friend group. Maybe it's even your family. But what area of your life does it seem like God is being ignored? I want you to identify this area, and then we have to recognize and admit that this is a problem, right? This is not the way that it should be. This is not the way that God has designed it. God should never be ignored or left out of any area of our life, but in fact, God should be at the center of every single area of our life. God needs to be at the center of every single area of our life. Every single thing that we're involved in, God needs to be at the center of. And it's more than putting God first. It's important, but sometimes I think we get the wrong idea in our head. Yes, God should be first. He should be our number one priority. But the way that looks is by keeping God at the center of everything. For me, for the longest time, I would say that God was first in my life. And my mindset was, as long as I spent time with God, as long as I spent time in the Word and praying, then I could go about the rest of my business, right? I could go play basketball. I could go to school. I could do my homework. I could hang out with my friends. I could do whatever it is that I was doing. But as long as I spent time with God, then I could go on to those things. But there was no connection between those things. I was a Christian, but then I was a basketball player. I was a student. I was a friend. I was a worker, whatever it was. But there was no overlap. There was no connection. And it didn't change for me until a friend told me that I need to start living my life more holistically. He said, instead of having like a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, I need to bring God into every single area. So I'm a basketball player, but what does that look like to bring God into that? What does it look like for you to bring God into your friend group? What does it look like for you to bring God into your workplace? What does it look like for you to bring God into your choir group or your friend group or the activities that you're involved in? They're not isolated things that we do, but God is in the midst. He's in the middle of everything that we're doing. Because I think we're missing the mark when we live in a way that tries to put God first, but fails to put him in and at the center of everything that we're doing. The only way to truly say that our relationship with God is the most important thing is if he is in everything. He can't be the most important thing in our life if he's not involved and at the center of everything that we're doing. Timothy Keller once said, if God is not at the center of your life, then something else is. God needs to be in and at the center of every single area of our life. Whatever we're involved in, whatever we spend our time doing, whatever we're passionate about, bring God into that area. Make him the center of that. Find a way to honor God through that. Ask God, how can I honor you through my work? How can I honor you in my friend group? How can I honor you in my club or in my sports team or in my activity that I'm doing? How can I use this activity to spread your love and to spread your truth with the people that are also involved? So again, my question is, what area does it seem like God's being ignored? What are you involved in that it seems like God is missing from? And once we identify this area, then we can move to our second step, is that we need to be moved to action. Once we identify this, we need to be moved to action. And like I said earlier, my favorite part about this story of Hezekiah is that he wasted no time getting to work and doing something. Right, once he's in charge, it's almost instant action that he starts reopening the temple and getting it back and running. He wasn't okay with the fact that people couldn't go to the temple and worship God. He wasn't okay with the fact that God was being removed from the city, and so he did something about it. Faith and conviction has to be put into action. Faith and conviction has to be put into action. It's something that we see throughout all of history, and especially in the Bible. We see that it's not enough to just believe something. It's not enough to just think something, but we have to do something with it. And when I think about this, I think of the example in James 2. Some of you might be familiar with it, but the illustration goes like this. Suppose you see a brother or a sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye and have a good day, stay warm and eat well, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? What good does it do to recognize a problem, to recognize something that's wrong, but then not do anything to try to fix it? It's one thing to acknowledge and recognize a need, but it's another thing to take steps to meet those needs. And when we care enough about something, then we need to allow that care, allow that burden in our heart to move us to action. We need to be people of action. When I think about this idea, I think about my older sister. She's 4 years older than me. She's currently a special ed teacher up in Marion, Indiana. And the thing that I love about my sister so much is just her heart and her passion for students with special needs. Just the way that she loves her students and cares for them, it's inspiring to me, and I look up to her in a lot of ways. And as a special ed teacher, she does a lot for her students, obviously from an academic standpoint, but just teaching them life skills and just loving them and caring for them. And she would coach their flag football team and basketball team. We have a picture. This is her, and that's some of her students. That was their flag football team. And it's funny because my sister doesn't know a lick about football, but she was willing to coach her students so that they could have the same opportunities as all the other students. And having said all that, my sister realized that once her students would graduate high school, there was a big drop-off because they had all this special attention and people pouring into them. But once they got their degree and graduated, there was almost no one there to help them. There was no one there to help them transition into the real world and transition into what life looks for them after high school. And my sister had a big burden for this. And so what my sister did is she decided to go back to school. She got her master's online through Kansas University, and she was actually finishing up her master's while she had a baby. She had a baby, and I think like a week or two later, she finished her master's. But she got her master's in secondary special education and transition services. So basically, her goal with that is to open up some sort of organization or nonprofit to help people with special needs transition from high school into the real world, to give them the life skills that they need to be fully functioning on their own. My sister, she had a burden. She cared about it, and so she did something about it. In our story for tonight, Hezekiah recognizes that things are not as they should be in Jerusalem. He had a burden for what was going on in this place, that people were living in a way that they shouldn't be. And because he felt so strongly about this, he had to do something about it. We have to let our burden move us to action. We have to care about something. When we care about something, we need to allow that to move us to action. Because maybe God has put a burden or a care on our heart because he wants to use us to do something about it. Maybe God has put a burden or a care in your heart because he wants to use you to bring about change. He wants to use you to minister in that situation. So we have to ask ourselves, do I care that God is being ignored in a certain area of my life? Do I care that God is being pushed to the side? Does it bother us that the place that we spend the most time, the thing that we're most passionate about, is something that God is being ignored in? When we recognize that God being ignored and being pushed to the side is a problem, then I believe that it will push us to action. It will push us to do something. My last point for tonight is that revival starts with us. Revival starts with us. Hezekiah, in this story, he didn't wait for anyone else to do something. He did it himself. He didn't wait for someone else to say something or to start a plan. He did it himself. He took it upon himself to make the changes. He took ownership of the situation, and he did something to bring change. And if there is an area in your life where God is being ignored, then the perfect person to do something about it is you. Right? You're already in the situation. You know the people involved. You know the reality of what's going on. So the perfect person to bring about the change is you. It wouldn't make sense for someone on the outside to come in and try to bring this change because you are in the situation. You're in the friend group. You're on the team. You're in the choir group. Whatever it is, you're there. You can bring the change. You can be the person that helps make God known. And I believe that God has placed us in situations and put us in positions on purpose so that he can use us for his purposes. He can use us to further his kingdom. I believe that God has us exactly where he wants us. He's positioned us in places to use us and to advance his kingdom. We are exactly where God wants us to be. Now we have to be willing to be used by God in those areas. Bringing revival, bringing life to a situation, it has to come from the people that are already present in those situations. You can bring the change. You can be the person that brings God into a situation. You can be the person that makes God known through whatever it is that you're involved in. You can be the person that leads your team in prayer before or after practices. You can be the person that asks your coworkers how you can be praying for them. You can be the person that sends encouraging texts to the person in your friend group that doesn't really know God. You can be the change. A really practical example of this is Will Fosnett. Will, he was a part of the senior group. He just graduated. He was in Neil's small group, graduated from Center Grove. And while he was in high school, one of the biggest things that he was involved in was choir. Him and a couple of friends in this choir group, they recognized that there were a lot of other kids in this group that didn't know who God was and they weren't Christians. And Will and his friends, they had a burden for this, and so they decided to start a Bible study within their choir group. And they started it, they met regularly, and all they did was come together once a week and just dive into God's word and talk about it. But Will was in this choir group. He was involved, but he realized that this was an area that God wasn't being made known in, and God was being ignored in this area. He was in the group, and he realized that he can use this group to make God known. He identified an area that he's already involved in, that he's already doing something in, and he made God known through this area. And what I love about this story is that Will, now that he's graduated, he actually passed down this responsibility to an underclassman so that this will continue to be true. But this is something that we all can do. Maybe it's not a Bible study, but maybe it's something as simple as, like I said, praying before practices or games, or sharing what God's been teaching you with your coworkers, or asking your coworkers how you can pray for them. We all can make God known through what we're involved in, and I believe that this is something that we're called to do. Because I think we're missing the point if we go to work, if we go to rehearsals, if we go to practice, if we go to school, if we hang out with our friends, and we're not making God known in those areas. Right, as Christians, we're in those areas, and our job is to make God known through that, is to spread his truth and his love for those people. And I think we're missing the point and we're missing the mark if we go to those things and we're involved in these activities, but we make no effort to make God known through them. This is what we're called to do. This is the purpose that is assigned to us. And the truth is that God wants to do his work through all of you. Right? God has a track record of using ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. And I believe that he wants to continue doing so. I believe that he wants to use all of us to bring about this kind of change. But I understand that this is difficult. It's different. It requires change. Change is never easy. It requires change in the way that you do things, change in the way that things operate, change in the way that things are ran, and how you approach things. But just because something has been done a certain way for a long period of time doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. And just because something has been done a certain way for a long period of time doesn't mean that it's being done the right way. You can be the change. If you identify the problem, you can be the person that brings about the change that needs to happen. Our bottom line for tonight is that we have to see where God is ignored, and then we have to look to make him known. We have to see where God is ignored, and we have to look to make him known. Because the sad reality is that God is being ignored all around our world. There are far more areas of life where God is ignored than where God is acknowledged and being made known. Colossians says that we are created by God for God. We are created to make God known and to share the truth of the gospel all over the world. But before we start worrying about making God known in other countries, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make God known right here where we are in our spheres of influence. We need to look to make God known in every aspect of our lives and everything that we're doing and we're involved in right now. We need to be bold and do what we can to make God known in and through what we're involved in. We need to recognize in our life where God is missing, and then we need to make an effort to make God known in those things.